President Bongbong Marcos eyes stronger ties with Washington in his 5-day visit to the United States. In his departure speech, Marcos Jr. said he will reaffirm the country's long-standing alliance with Washington.
I intend to convey to President Biden and his senior cabinet officials that the President is determined to forge an even stronger relationship with the United States in a wide range of areas that not only address concerns of our times, but also those that are critical to advancing our core interests.
President Bongbong Marcos marks his first year of election on May 9. At the moment, he's on his 10th foreign trip with an official visit to the U.S. How has the president fared so far in terms of policies and performance? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. And welcome to The Chiefs. I'm Edwin Gao. With me tonight here in the studio, Robbie Alampayo of One News and of course, Lucy Guzvaldez, the head of News 5.
Welcome back.
Okay, thank you. ano ba nangyari? I just
Bukod sa power outage kahapon.
Actually, dami nangyari.
Ang
This week
dami.
this week is gonna be a busy week.
Oo nga.
Tsaka, yung mga yung mga news events, kumbaga outage, and then yung mga collisions, no?
Yeah,
Ang dami.
and
no?
continuation of
Tsaka,
exercises.
Of course, tuloy yun. Yun yung mga
Yeah,
malalaki.
Cope Thunder resumed after a three-decade hiatus. It's the biggest Air Force exercises of the U.S. and the Philippines. It stopped after Pinatubo and after the bases treaty was not renewed.
So, tinuloy yun.
Tuloy yun, oo.
So, teka, ba't kakatapos lang ng balikatan?
That's
di ba?
balikatan. Balikatan is ano eh.
Tapos
Iba
ngayon,
pa
ito
yun.
naman, Cope Thunder.
Mm.
And while the president is in the US, no? So, mukhang pinaiigting talaga, no? Yung ating relasyon.
Oh, and all of this as backdrop as well to something that
Yes.
crept up without people noticing.
Yeah.
1 year na mag-go.
One year na,
since
yes.
the elections.
Grabe, no?
Diba?
Imagine, May 2, that's a week away from the anniversary
Exactly.
of the
Exactly
win,
the way.
the historic win.
31 million.
And so he'll be abroad, and then he'll be abroad again come May 6. Sa coronation naman, no?
Oo.
But it's really time for us to look back at this past year, no? Well, technically not 12 months,
No.
but 10.
Yeah.
But
10
really,
ba?
no, but that's really where
11,
But
yeah.
I think without going through the technicalities of when the term actually starts, that's really where people mark.
Yeah.
It's always the election day.
It's when the public gave the mandate.
Yes, but of course, officially, whatever his agenda had been, started kicking in on
June 30.
So,
Yeah.
Okay. So lots to discuss, lots to recall, to remember, in fairness as well as with as much criticality as we could afford. But really, ang daming kailangan pag-usapan din.
oo nga, kulang isang oras, but that's what we'll do, I think, today.
Anyway, two political analysts are joining us in a bit to talk about President Bongbong Marcos and his policies and his performance. The Chiefs will be right back.
And here to share their assessment of the Marcos administration's first year, political analysts Professor Edna Co and Jean Encinas Franco. Good evening, professors, and welcome to the Chiefs.
Live.
Face to
Good
face.
evening, live.
Buhay na buhay in the flesh.
Good evening, Chiefs. And thank you for the invitation.
Oh, our pleasure, of course. You know, of course, that we're 7 days away from the first anniversary of Bongbong Marcos as the winner of the presidential elections. It's not quite 1 year yet. It's 11 months from actual administration. But eto na ang tanong. What grade would you give him after year one?
Grade
Yung
ba
muna.
agad?
Yes. Grade muna and then you justify later.
Kailangan pa siyang mag-complete, incomplete pa eh. UP ano pa rin, ano?
Bakit? What's there to complete?
Well,
of course, we're just talking about year 1 of 6,
Yes,
no, to be
oo.
fair. So, incomplete would be, sabihin na lang natin, not a fair grade to give.
First quarter lang,
Oo,
first quarter.
di pa tapos yung ano eh.
But I think it's
crime,
also fair for us to demand a lot from him because his victory was unprecedented, di ba? And he promised a lot also. Kaya lang, during the first few months, tumaas ang presyo ng mga bilihin, which is exactly the opposite of what he
His agenda.
promised
Yes.
to do, no? From day 1 of his campaign, no? And then, the way he framed it was in such a way that he had no control over it, di ba? Like, because of the war in Ukraine.
External factors.
Pagtaas. So,
Yeah.
the fact that you're president, you should actually do something about it or say something to your constituents, to the nation that you're trying to do your best in the best way that you can in the powers that have been given you.
Well, you know, the fact that he took on agriculture secretary position doesn't that mean anything? That
Wala bang plus yung tapang
Oo,
doon?
di ba? Professor Ko.
Lucy, I'll be a little bit fair to the president in the sense that he came in at a time when the challenges for the country were so alarming. We're coming already. And I think we have to look at it in that sense. On the other hand, he has quite a big number of votes garnered during the last election. So who else do people pin hope on except this new president? Having said that, well, like in the university of the 6 grading periods, I will give him what is expected to be delivered during the first grading period.
Okay.
Did he deliver on that? So that's my fundamental question. So going back to your question,
Anong grade?
anong grade? Not quite good, not quite high, not high, in fact. But I would say we have to identify where the improvements can be made because there has been tremendous expectation from the Filipino people.
Okay, so kung running for honors, no?
So, running for honors na.
Hindi,
Expectations nga.
Kasi alam mo, yung mga nagra-run for honor sa UP, yun yung mga grade conscious. So, kunyari,
Hindi kami yun. Hindi namin
hindi na ko yun, pero alam ko gano'n ng mga tao roon. Kung running for honors, nasaan siya? Dos ba siya? 2.5 ba siya? Kasi sabi mo, hindi naman too high, hindi rin naman too low.
I will suspend the grade muna because there is so much more to be
Okay,
delivered.
then let's just define the expectation.
Yeah.
Diba? I know
Yeah.
you as professors, you don't necessarily grade your students based on expectations,
Yes.
but you do have expectations. So let's be objective about that. What were the fair expectations, given 2 things? On the one hand, a really high mandate, a really big victory. So that expectations there and based on his promises. But also, on the other hand, let's face it, let's look back 1 year ago, expectations na Marcos yan, alay yan ni Duterte,
Tama.
and so on. So based on those 2 expectations, how has he fared so far?
Ako muna. I think when he came in as president, napaka-general nung kanyang promises no? And I think the more general he spoke, the higher the expectations of people were. Like he said, yung presyo ng bigas, all of that.
20 pesos
20 to 30 pesos by the end of the year. It didn't turn out, it looks like it didn't turn out that good, no, as delivered. It was not delivered as promised. So I think ito yung isang expectation. Having come from a very huge votes earned during the last election, everybody was expecting better quality of life. Hindi pa rin natin masasabi na there is indeed a good quality of life. At that time, he came in, COVID time, But look, he still has to appoint a Department of Secretary,
Of health.
which is very crucial. It has not happened yet. Food security is at the front line of the Filipino people. No, sabi ko nga the overtures meant for the poor include really food security. But having taken on the Department of Agriculture leadership, mukhang ang opening salvo was a controversy rather than a solution. So I think this is quite bothersome, no, for a starter of year one. And I would think, in the beginning, I thought, baka nga maganda, the President is also the Dep of Agriculture Secretary kasi food is quite important. He can call on his power and his authority to really make solutions there. But
Professor Jean?
it did not. It did not.
Ako naman, I like his economic team and the fact that he appointed a career official in the Department of Foreign Affairs. Says a lot about, his focus on the longer term, that these areas are what he is going to focus on in the longer term. But we don't know come June 30 whether there are people who ran last year who will be new members of his cabinet. So we have to wait and see about his developments.
Well, Prof, expectation is one thing, di ba? But there were also, aside from expectations, there were also some concerns and some fears of Marcos going back to office,
Yes,
of
that's what I wanted to
becoming
ask
the
you.
president again of the
Correct.
Philippines. When you look back at this whole year, what materialized and what did not? In terms of not just expectations but as well concerns.
Or the expectations of the kalaban, no? Kasi lahat ng mga hindi bumoto sa kanya, ang fear nila nga was, wow, another Marcos.
Ganito yan, ganun
So,
na, ganun. Yeah.
yun ba, expectation din ba yun? And how would you grade him there? I mean, after 1 year.
And let's spell it out. I mean, at risk of, I'll go out on a limb and let's say, when you said Marcos before, people would say, martial law, human rights victims, oppression of the
Dictatorship,
opposition,
yeah.
magnanakaw yan, and so on. Those were the expectations, however you want to, but that is how people framed it, certainly during the campaign. Now, objectively, in fairness, over the last, what impressions have you gotten?
May I respond to that? In fairness to BBM, yung expectation na yan ng mga tao, we didn't see it yet. We didn't see it that way. I mean, he showed compassion. His speeches were really for the poor. And he was listening, it seems, from people around him, from his cabinet. To begin with, as Jean said, respectable yung maraming members ng kabinete niya.
There's a spectrum there.
There's a spectrum, but I would say, pero yung pinaka-importante has to be addressed food and health. Right? So sa akin nakahang yung ganong
Doon
question.
pa rin,
Doon pa rin. But we didn't see yet any sign of dictatorship, too harsh a rule. In fact, some people felt a liberation from the previous
Coming after the previous
administration.
administration.
Yeah, and we thought, wow, this is a regular guy who expect to talk but also to listen, to people around him. And he was trying to do that, it seems, during the last few months.
I think on the economics, on foreign policy and governance in general, that's where we will be splitting hairs.
Right.
But just so we don't leave this, as you said, general expectations muna based on very general promises. One very general promise came down to just one word: unity. That was the whole. I remember watching President Duterte just about a month ago. I think it was an SMNI interview, and I remember thinking, "Oh my God, I've forgotten how this feels to see this every day." President Duterte, ranting and so on. It really came down from that, diba? I mean, on the unity promise and whatever else comes there, including, at least hindi nagmumurahan sa TV araw-araw, and there's your
That was
gauge
such a
of that.
low bar.
Yeah, it is such a low bar. That's part of it. That's part of it, di ba?
Yeah, pero Pero meron tayong naririnig na parang tila walang unity doon sa kampo niya. So that's a minus, no? But gusto ko lang balikan yung with regard to dictatorship. Yeah, he's far from his father, no, in all aspects. Pero yung may mga scholars din na nagsasabi, iba na ngayon yung form of authoritarianism. Like for instance, you don't necessarily have to muzzle the press. The fact, yung troll camps, yung using vloggers to sort of amplify your message, to sort of continue with the revision of history, and now yung the use of pop culture in terms of movies. So medyo there's continuity and change. So parang naiba na no, na sabi nila yung mga, like for instance, people who are called populists or far right in other countries, sabi nila na parang kailangan may modicum of legitimacy ka rin. So kunwari, at dapat sa international community medyo maganda ang reception mo. Secondly, you also have to perform your best in terms of at least kahit pa paano nakikita na you're doing something about the economy. So that's also probably why
So what's
he
his
got
score
there.
Sige. So public public image yan eh. Di ba?
Yes,
Perception
exactly.
yan. So you have to hand it to his handlers, no? That they keep him from that kind of anong tawag dyan, gulo. So how would you score him on that respect?
I think during the first 6 months talagang kita mo yung gulo, especially in terms of handling his media image.
Yes.
Pero sabi ko nga, wala bang staff work na halimbawa kahit may cabinet hearing, important points. I mean, nung araw index card pa yung bibigay mo sa boss mo. I mean, ngayon pwede nang magawa yun more efficiently, no? So parang January until now, parang it certainly improved. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, Lucci said a word, his handlers. 1 year later, do you get a sense that this is still, about the people around him, or is it legitimately now about President Marcos?
Actually, any president or any administration, part of a significant character that's imprinted by the president is due to the so-called handlers and people around the president, he or she, no? So I think let's not put a divide, a very exclusive divide between the persona of the president and the handlers, because these are a dynamic.
Yeah, but I guess my question there, I understand, di ba? Parang the man is his team. His team does define who he is. But I guess my question is, where do you see him with respect to that team? Is he leading that team, or is he a product of that team?
Well, I guess it is more the president really being handled by the people around him and being coached, no, by people around him. But to begin with, his character was not the same as the first Ferdinand Marcos to begin with. So that's, I think, an important consideration. Am I listening to my, to people around me? And I think he is. So he has a softer personality, more listening, but with the coaching that even helps and shape, except that we have to go back to the fundamentals. Are you delivering what is expected of the almost 60% of the voters who put him up there, no? And I think this is the bigger question and the bigger challenge. Is he delivering, or is he starting to show that indeed there are significant changes that will happen? I think part of the influencing around him was due to the technology that we have. If you notice, there are a lot of messaging that come from him, which are video taped, rather than,
And he communicates through his Facebook page.
Exactly.
Through Cello, who shoots awkwardly a lot of times.
Yes.
So we really don't get it straight
With a cell
from
phone.
him.
No.
Yeah, that's true, no? Although, as you said, no, that has helped him a lot. Can I shift na to his relationship with his supermajority in Congress? What does that have to do with his performance? Has it helped him or has it brought him down, especially during the times when, there was a move to change the charter and it seemed like a really very determined move, no? Also, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which also was backed up by him personally, no, na parang siya raw ang nag-utos nun. I want to get your thoughts on how he's used his support in Congress.
Well, my example would be yung the charter change issue. It's very curious that during the campaign he did not cite the charter change as one of his priorities, and yet on the first regular session of Congress, that has already been brought up and it has been approved at an expedited pace. So, but he keeps on saying that it's not his priority.
But his party is Federalista,
Yeah.
which of course brings in the presumption that they're for charter change to federalize.
Right, right.
But then again, in the Philippines, political
It's actually
parties
very
are
conflicting, if you ask.
Yeah, so I am
from.
not so sure whether there are people in the president's camp. We know that they're not really united at this point, based on what we've seen so
It's
far.
not a singular camp.
Maybe there are people there who still wants
Do you
charter
think it's
change.
part of the imaging na parang Congress, you do what you do according to what we have talked about in executive sessions, but in the meantime, I will say this, and you will want to do the legwork. Do you think there's such an arrangement?
Yeah, I think that's deliberately putting or recognizing independence of the Congress, whether the House or the Senate, but even more so in the House, because the Senate is a very tough setup. I mean, it's really, we have 24 republics there.
Right, yeah.
And that's more difficult to have, but in the House, I think it's deliberate that, but I've seen also that a majority of the people in the House are young people. We have trained many of them upon entry into the last year in June.
So we'll hold you to account.
And really, you see the independence of thinking of the younger legislators. They think more independently. They think more differently from the traditional politicians that we have seen. So this is a challenge, actually, to be more sensitive to what kind of legislative is this. So to me, that is genuinely, it's an independently thinking group, but doesn't sit very well, very neatly with the position of the president.
Professor, let me push on that a bit. Would you credit a youth movement in Congress? Would you credit a new generation, young blood, fresh blood, however you want to phrase it? Or would you just credit it to basically a weaker hold on Congress? I mean, certainly this is no longer President Duterte calling on his supermajority. It's just a different style of leadership and so on. Is it really a generational thing? Or is it just the fact that we're getting less pressure now from Malacanang?
I think it's both. It's both. The younger people are thinking more independently. They have a different mindset. And there are emerging young people in Congress. On the other hand, it's also about Malacanang having a different way of thinking from. And I think it's kung propaganda yon or kung imaging, it will be good because then it will come upon us that, okay, so there now is a more independent legislative and executive and so on.
Well,
I ask that because I'm Professor Jing, di ba? Parang there have been youth movements and youth, caucuses every Congress, di ba? And we pin our hopes
Young
on
Turks.
them. And then Duterte
Wala.
comes along, cracks the whip, and all of a sudden everybody's towing the
Right.
line.
Yeah. At saka yung use nung unang, merong mga use na hindi na use ngayon na.
Oh, exactly.
Sila na ngayon,
Exactly.
traditional.
Yeah.
With regard to Chacha, I think there's also an outside factor. Ma'am, yung lobby for yung economic provisions.
Well, yeah, that's true.
I think
From
there's
the
a strong
businessmen,
lobby. Yeah.
yes. And there's a lot to talk about. We haven't even actually tackled the West Philippine Sea, which is the main agenda, I think, whether they, publicize it or not, no, of the visit to the U.S. So let's take a quick breather for now, and we will continue this discussion after the break. Stay with us.
Both President Bongbong Marcos and Vice President Sara Duterte received high approval ratings in the latest survey by Pulse Asia. The survey results show that Marcos had an approval rating of 78%, while Duterte had 83%.
The approval ratings of President Bongbong Marcos and Vice President Sara Duterte were virtually unchanged in the latest Pulse Asia survey.
Thanks for staying with us here on The Chief. Still with us, political analyst Edna Kong and Jean Encinas Franco. Professors, sige, let's start getting into the economy. And let's get into it by way of Labor Day. Kakatapos lang ng May 1. I mean, take it from that perspective. There was, as we keep saying, there was a lot of expectations. It always comes with anybody who comes with a big mandate from the voters. Where do you start off discussing President Marcos' performance on the economy? Let's take it from the lens of the labor groups.
Well, actually, Labor Day, labor at the center of our economy and so on. No? I was saying earlier, there's so much basic things that have to be dealt with, which the current administration has not sufficiently embarked on, and that is wage, pay, employment for one. And I think, as I was saying, I was listening to some labor groups this morning, earlier, and the common statement there was, for the first time in a long time, and probably in the history of May 1 celebration, we have everyone united, the left, the middle, and even the conservative, so to speak, conservative labor groups,
What does this
humming one song. How do we see labor being valued? And how do we see increase in our wage? In other words, we're
There's a
coming back to
common
the
need.
fundamental. So whether you are yellow or not so yellow, you're orange and so on, the colors for the first time don't matter on Labor Day. We're looking at the challenge, the labor sector challenging the administration. What is it for us?
I mean, Professor Jean, what does that mean, this coming together? Given that 1 year ago, during the campaigns, these different colors, even along the labor sector, were in fact divided.
Yeah.
Diba? Naghiwa-hiwalay din ng mga in-endorse. Ngayon, as Professor Coy is saying, wala, they're all back. They need to speak with one voice now.
Yes, I think that only means that this really is an urgent problem, not just employment, but underemployment. Because of the high standard of living, ibig sabihin, pag maraming underemployed, hindi kasya, sabi ng mga economists, hindi kasya yung sinisweldo nila. They have to find other jobs to augment their daily sustenance. And that tells you that about the quality of life that some of our fellow Filipinos have, no? And also social protection, that's very important. Pag nag-retire ka, magkano lang ang makukuha mo sa SSS? Primarily because captive din ng employers ang gobyerno. Huwag niyong tataasan ng sweldo, huwag niyong tataasan ng sa SSS. Hindi na kami mag-hire. So it's like a vicious cycle.
But ma'am, isn't that a problem for with all administrations?
Yes.
And
Yes.
but what would make it different now, if there is any difference?
Well, he had a lot of big promises during the campaign, and much is expected of the president right now. Well, he has a good economic team from my reckoning, so he has to double time probably.
But let me pounce on that kasi a while ago we were talking about huge expectations coming from and then we were looking at the performance over the past 11 months. But let's not look at it as a vacuum, I suppose, kasi the expectations are based on promises made during the campaign, at least in great part. And there were marvelous promises made during that campaign, stabilizing prices of food sovereignty. I remember that. Food sovereignty is one, stabilizing prices of basic goods, and power rates as well. And after that 11 months,
Actually, I don't think it's about just the promises prior to or during the campaign. Yes and no for me, no, because it's like, yes, it's about the promise. Now it's singilan time, right? But it's also about the reality that catch us, that is on our face, on everyone's face.
Whether
reality,
it's promised or not.
Yes, whether it's promised or not. Life is getting tough. I mean, the leadership has to address it, or at least to show the leadership. No, how do I bring? I mean, we have 5.8% unemployment. That's huge. We have 13 trillion utang, right?
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, in the face of all of that, you had COVID, which is not addressed fully yet, because we have to, COVID is, it's a long-term also health response that is needed. In other words, it's very much on our face that the reality is there. It's not just about, the president promising.
I understand. I suppose what I'm trying to ask is, did you feel a sense of urgency? Kasi,
Yes.
After all those promises, tumaas ang presyo ng asukal, ng bigas, ng sibuyas.
Unexpectedly, pati mga commodities.
Although in part it's also because of external factors, but also in part it's also because of internal policy issues.
Exactly. And part of that is really the agriculture policy and how it is handling
And agriculture leadership.
food provision. Yes. How are we looking at agriculture to be the star and the redeemer of hunger, for example? Kaya lang, dun sa onset pa lang ng administration, ang dami ng dynamics na lumabas, no? So it's really mind-boggling. And we raise a question, everyone raises a question, can agriculture really help give us the answer? So, hindi pa resolve yun eh. So, to me, it's a lingering thing, and it's a major, major thing. Hindi lang the poorest, it's the middle class as well, complaining about price of onion, price of gasoline. No, if you're driving,
To that point, external nga raw yun di ba? And you will have to agree that a lot of it is really external. I mean, sa fuel pa lang, di ba? Fuel prices. Wala na, di ba? And then even if you say, for example, ang taas ng kuryente ngayon, baka mawalan pa tayo ng power, di ba? Hindi mo rin yun may aatang sa kanya, di ba? Because all this happened before his term. Is there really something he can do in terms of grabbing the bull by the horns, kumbaga, and taking control and, diba, paving a better way toward solutions for these perennial problems? Meron ba talaga? Or are we expecting too much of him?
No, because you're a president, and I remember the time, during the Ramos administration, at the very least, Ramos knew what his responsibilities were. He used LEDAC, for instance, to the hilt. He used his powers as president so that at the very least he is seen as a working president.
Yeah. Not only that, I mean, I don't know about the energy sector itself, diba? But people felt the price crunch in food. And particularly under his portfolio as agriculture secretary. His dilemma now is that people are going abroad, people have relatives abroad, and people are saying, uy, ang sibuyas sa amin ganito lang. Diba? And ang bigas sa amin ganito, naibaba na lahat. Diba? And it used to be that we were all blaming Ukraine. Diba? But so where does that put him, particularly with his leadership of the Department of Agriculture? We've had a number of announcements already that no, he is looking for someone. After May, do you expect him to still be holding on to the agriculture portfolio?
If you will ask me, if I were the president, I'd say, sige, I need an economic genius, not just someone who will, sa bureaucracy kasi segmented yung function, no? I mean, I'm in agriculture, I'm in energy, I'll do work on energy, on environment and so on trade and industry and so on. But this one is really having an economic genius which can weave in, integrate. Where does environment, agriculture, energy, kasi everything plays out nga eh. But the point raised earlier by Luce, is it external or is it internal? I would say, kailangan strong tayo internally, find some solutions which are internally viable, and that's putting ourselves together, one who can really integrate. If the chief executive cannot really have a stronger hand to say, come on, we will have to integrate this in a matrix way, in that way, but at least find an economic genius who could, by themselves, magagaling yung cabinet member and secretary, but there has to be an integration
he
of
has
things.
geniuses on his board already. I mean, Secretary Fabella is known as not only as an economist, but really a specialist as well. Not Fabella. NEDA. Si Balsacan is known as a proponent of agriculture as well, food security and so on. And he has that strong team. So what else are we looking for?
No, but that's yung energy mo, I mean, these are very, very crucial, no? Mabuti na lang, I would recognize transportation, which is crucial, public works. The president tried to push it further and say, we'll continue the infrastructure. This is very crucial to development, connecting markets to the sources of, the goods. This is an important legacy maybe that he really put forward. Pero it's really connecting, no? Transportation, although hindi pa yan fully resolved, but also like the integration between energy and the agriculture, ang taas, bababa, tataas. So I think there is something there that can be done to really integrate. Ang NEDA kasi, with due respect to my friend R.C. Balisacan, planning no?
Yes.
But yung implementation, nasa iba pang
cabinet.
Department. Maganda ang plan mo, but how do we really, put things together?
At
That's
saka hindi
crucial.
lang sa kadiwa ang solusyon talaga.
Oo,
Yeah.
Pero yun naman, imaging yun
Yun
talaga.
nga,
Obviously,
exactly.
no?
Image.
Obviously.
Yeah.
But in spite of all of this, mataas pa rin
Yeah.
ang ratings niya, no? Public opinion ratings niya. What do you think accounts for that?
Well, historically, yung surveys say all the first years of each administration daw, except yata nung kay Gloria, mataas. So parang
So
in
ito
a way,
expected din
most
to.
EDSA,
Benefit of the doubt.
Filipinos have given presidents a sort of a honeymoon period for a year. But I've always argued, even before Marcos Jr. won the presidency, that he is not Duterte in terms of rhetoric, in terms of speaking to his base. So I'm not so sure that he can do a Duterte moving forward. Because Duterte has his way of, he uses humor
His charm.
or cursing.
And he knows who follows him. He knows that
Yes.
person individually, and he speaks to him, no?
Yes.
And so,
And
but
whereas,
you don't feel that with President Marcos?
no, he's still technocratic, which is not the way Duterte spoke, no? Even at the height of COVID. Sinasabi niya, wala akong alam dyan, pero kita mo naman yung ratings niya, hindi pa rin bumaba. So, with regard to rhetoric, is very different. So, I'm not so sure how he would handle, let's say, a major scandal moving forward, or a major controversy, a major crisis.
O punta na tayo sa foreign affairs policy niya.
Can I just say one
Yes,
thing
please, go
on
ahead.
that, no? Mataas ang rating. Kasi in governance, you're talking of leader, but you're also talking about the led. So ako, I'd like
Followers,
to,
yeah.
the followers, no? So I'd like to say, okay, that's about the leadership that we're talking about. Pero kasi sa akin, it's about the people also. People who continue to pinho. The Filipinos are very generous and very kind people. And I think it's about that. First year, pagbigyan natin, tingnan natin. Maybe that's about it also. Bigyan ng pagkakataon, no?
Yes,
Filipinos as we are. So it's about also the public. But also, years back, yung ating democracy nag-slide down na rin no? It's a sliding of the democracy, which means wala na yung yung masungit, yung binabantayan natin. But I think the more and more, and it showed in the election result. We're generous. We have forgotten.
We're mapagparaya.
Mapagparaya is the word.
Yes.
So I think it's also about that. I mean, but of course it's an interplay. Yung the leader.
I think that's what they keep saying about us, no? Our resilience works for and against us in a way.
But before we leave politics and optics, before we move to foreign, let me squeeze this in. After the elections, kasi last year, a lot of people expected there to be a great divide between the Marcos camp, or the Marcos supporters, and the Yellows.
Yes.
A lot of people expected that, na parang, naku, ito na.
Kaya nga unity yung goal eh.
Oh,
diba?
Did we see that materialize in the last year? I mean, or is it possible? Is it possible? And some would say this: is it possible that it turns out that this administration has a lot more in common with those in the yellow camp than with the Duterte camp? Not historically, but in terms of the people that they appoint, the belief system, and concepts, even human rights.
Well, we did not see any quarrel, or at least publicly, no, between the Dilawans, so-called Dilawans, and the current administration, mainly because some were co-opted. Diba? Some yellows were co-opted, and that's actually the
way to go.
The way
actually.
to go, no? That's one way of not really committing violence against your potential opponents, but co-opting them.
Quiet.
So you appear benign, no? Secondly, they were probably afraid of the high approval ratings. Tapos yung ang laking boto, and the troll armies, no? Which were really relentless, especially at the beginning, first 2 months of his term.
But you're talking about the political players.
Yeah.
Diba? In terms of being cooperative. I think to Ed's point.
Yeah.
But about the followers, the movement, the community, however you want to define it, the camp, the people who voted with a trepidation against a Marcos return. Diba? And then now, parang, is it possible that part of the high approval ratings is some people in that camp actually heaving a sigh of relief na, okay.
They look at the last 6 years and say, this is a relief.
Professor ko, gigil na gigil ka kanina.
That's why I said you have to look at the situation on two aspects. The leader, the politicians, and also the people. Nag-change din rin kasi yung mga tao eh. The followers of the yellow, nagsiswitch.
Okay, how did they change? The yellow, the supporters of the pink and the yellow. Ano namang kulay?
Ano na kulay?
Okay.
I think it's about the Pinoy psychology that let's see what happens. Let's give chance. Tingnan natin.
So may ganon din.
May ganon. But,
okay.
Some political theorists would say, well, it's a democratic sliding. It's a democracy sliding. However you interpret it, but like Filipino, sa akin, the element of culture, let's see how it goes. So we'll be a little bit tempered. We'll see how it goes. And then, it's us as a people
but
also.
But on that point, one big question mark, of course, for President Bongbong Marcos was whether or not he can get past still this looming shadow of his father, and the negative legacies of the Marcos name. Given everything we've been discussing, one big question after 1 year, on the people, and I'm not talking about just those who voted for Lenny or who identify themselves as opposition, but for the Filipinos in general. And it's not just about President Marcos, but us as a people, as the
Yes.
culture, as you said. Have we moved past the conversations about corruption, about the accountability, about the human
Yes.
rights violations
Yes.
for which there has still been no accounting? Do you feel that the country is moving beyond that conversation at this point?
I don't think so. I think it's the duty of both the traditional and
Yeah, that's duty.
Social
You're
media.
talking about duty. I'm asking, what's the sentiment of the people now?
No.
How are they behaving right now?
I think they're still not forgetting the Marcos Senior's past and how we should move forward. We should still be relentless in seeking accountability. That's my sense. In fact, after the elections, if you can see, some civil society groups have formed groups, fighting revisionist history that's happening. Some groups are training, for instance, women leaders so that they'll be more confident the next time they want to run for public office. So a lot are in the pipeline, and let's hope and see that they make a difference.
Professor Ko, we're almost out of time, but do you agree? And if ever, how do you see the public reconciling these two things? That on the one hand, no, never forget, no, moving on. On the other hand, we need to move on. We need to revive the economy. We need a government to succeed for and with the people. How do you think, if they are,
Okay.
they're reconciling these two things?
Time and situation are changing. Ang dami dun sa noon, anti-Marcos, history of BBM's father and so on. Ang dami dun nawala na, nagkasakit na. I mean, the population is changing, no? But on top of it, so I think medyo hindi na ganun how do you call that, more activist and aggressive yung
Intense.
yung maraming population natin. But on top of it, education has a big role. Anong tinuturo sa eskwelahan? Nawala na nga sa libro yung di ba? I mean, and this is now a subject and an object of how do we address education. And this is a point of discussion currently. Nawala na ba yung pages sa ating history books na ganito? For us to because if you compare ours in other countries, ang lakas nun sa ibang countries, especially the Asian countries. But sa atin hindi nagme-melt, no? It's subsiding, and that's why I say we have to look at ourselves as well as a people. Generation of young people, they're kinder. They're very kind to the administration. Give them a chance. We'll be part of it to change it, and so on. And so
from the
things,
woke,
Oo.
that's, I mean, di ba? This is so
Things are
different
changing.
from the woke culture abroad. Anyway, there's so much to talk about. We
Yes.
didn't even talk about foreign
Foreign
policy.
policy na even tuloy.
And
So we need a part two, ha?
speaking of education, we didn't even get to talk about Duterte.
Exactly.
Secretary Duterte, di ba?
That's it.
And the
Interesting.
which is
bit.
part of the administration,
Yes.
really. All right.
Well, anyway, that's it for now. Obviously, in this coming weeks and days, we'll still be talking about
We should.
upcoming anniversary of the May 2022 elections, and we'll be talking to other experts on that. In the meantime, maraming salamat po, Professor
Thank
Jean
you.
Encinas Franco
Ma'am
and
and
Professor
ma'am.
Edna.
Thank you.
Thank you also.
And that is it for the Chiefs. Ako po si Robbie Alampay.
We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez.
I'm Ed Lingao. We are One News, all sides, all the time.